Hi everyone, welcome to Poisonous People. Today I want to share with you a concept that I call True or False NPD. Now this is not any kind of official diagnostic criteria. It's certainly not in the DSM. It's not really anywhere on the internet because this is my own personal assessment tool. But I thought I would share it with you because I think you would find this incredibly helpful as well. Understanding the difference between true and false NPD will resolve the following questions. Can a narcissist change? Is NPD contagious? Does self-awareness mean you don't have NPD? Is NPD truly a rare condition? And what is the greatest risk factor for developing NPD? If you listen carefully throughout this video, you may actually hear me give the answers to these questions, or you'll be able to figure them out yourself once you get the gist of what true NPD and false NPD is. So first, we have to have a basic understanding of what narcissistic personality disorder is. And put very simply, narcissistic personality disorder is a disorder of the self. Now, this is where things get interesting because the self isn't just this one-dimensional concept. The self is actually a whole constructed of several parts: molecular, neural, psychological, and social. For purposes of this video, we're only going to focus on psychological and social aspects of the self. Psychological aspects of the self would largely include traits that we would understand and recognize as the personality. Personality is determined by several traits, including behavior patterns, thought patterns, character, and temperament. For the most part, personality is permanent and does not change over time. There are exceptions to that, but we're going to go with this idea for purposes of this video today. Then the social part of the self we would refer to as the identity. And identity is often a matter of purpose and belonging. Identity encompasses the memories, experiences, relationships, roles, and values that create one's sense of self. I want to very strongly assert that identity is not made up of these individual things. Identity is the sense of ourselves that we get from those things. And of course, identity is generally fluid and it can change. So you can maybe sort of see where I'm going with this already at this early stage. We have two types of NPD that we're going to be looking at, true and false NPD, and I have isolated two aspects of the self, the psychological and the social, which would correspond to the personality and the identity. So what we're looking at is we are looking at disorders or disturbances that would affect one or the other aspect of the self. So when we're looking at personality-based disorders, what happens here is that the personality is molded and shaped by outside influences and experiences at an early age. The child has no choice in the matter. This is how the personality is formed. Identity-based disorders or disturbances of the self usually occur when that identity is prescribed or adopted after a true personality has already been established. Many personality theories would say that after the age of 8, your personality is pretty much set in stone. Now, I know there's probably a lot of people out there who would object to that, and they would say, no, my personality changed. I would argue that that's not true. I would say that your identity probably changed, especially as a high school student, because you were experimenting with who you are, and that is largely based on belonging and purpose. And so we might put on different hats in our adolescence to try to figure out which social groups we belong to. And that's our identity. So remember, personality is pretty much set, but identity can fluctuate. So if somebody has true NPD, that means that they suffered some kind of arrested development at a very early age. We're talking age 5 and under. 6 and 7 are still iffy, but definitely if somebody kind of had a wonderful childhood up until age 8 and then they suffered trauma, I'm going to call that false NPD. Why? Because they don't really have a personality disorder. And the difference is important because if the true NPD occurred in early childhood, their personality is actually comprised of the narcissistic traits. So there's no cure, but management is certainly possible. These people are also usually not self-aware. Young children, I don't care who they are, they don't have the capacity to make sound decisions. They don't really reason logically, and they certainly don't understand morality. As a very young child, they may understand that something is good or bad, but that's because their parents told them, and all they know is that they'll be rewarded for being good and they'll be reprimanded or punished for being bad. But they may never actually achieve a deeper understanding of why something is immoral on a more philosophical level, because you need to be able to finish the early development stages in order to move on to the higher levels of self-development. So it's usually in our adolescence that we start to grow a conscience and we start to have a moral fiber. Somebody with NPD, if they are still stuck in this kind of incomplete child stage, they're never going to finish and graduate onto the higher levels of self-development. So that means they're not usually going to be self-aware ever. Even if you tell them to their face that they're a narcissist, they may not believe you. And they're going to be very delusional. They're going to be very unreasonable. This is why people often will say that if you are self-aware, you cannot be a narcissist. And that's not true. I mean, we can't just lump everybody into one category and say, well, that's it. You're self-aware. You can't possibly be a narcissist. That's not true. But this is why it is typically understood that if you're self-aware, you're probably not a narcissist. And then the last thing that we have here is that true NPD is extremely rare. So when the DSM says that only 1 to 2% of the population actually has true NPD, that's probably accurate. I am going to leave room for the likelihood that somebody with true NPD is not insightful enough to seek therapy. And so they may think, I don't need therapy. And so there's probably a lot of true narcissists, true people with NPD running around out there who are undiagnosed. But my belief is that we can rest assured that something like this really is truly rare. What most people are acquainted with today would be false NPD. It looks like NPD. It sounds like NPD. It acts like NPD, but it's really not truly a personality disorder. It's more a disturbance of the identity. So with false NPD, we have some sort of change that occurs after after trauma, especially after the age of 8. So you will see people that will say things like, I shut down when I was 12, or I was hurt so bad, I made the decision never again, and I was just going to become a badass, and I wasn't going to let people take advantage of me. I'm going to take advantage of them. Well, it's kind of interesting that you just decided to be a narcissist, because true personality doesn't form that way. You don't get to choose whether you're extroverted or introverted. This is just kind of inherent in who you are. You can act like you're not really you. If you are more of a sensitive person, you can certainly act like you're a tough guy or a tough girl, but deep down, that's really not who you are at heart. And this is why false NPD can be completely cured. Somebody with false NPD can point to a time when they didn't feel this way. They can remember a time when they weren't narcissistic. These individuals with false NPD have a former life that they can draw upon, and they can get back to themselves. And they're usually self-aware. Why? Because they completed their early childhood development without interruption. And so they're able to continue growing and developing. They have a lot more insight, whereas somebody with true NPD usually has terrible insight. So the reason I am calling this false NPD is because it's my belief that you do not have narcissistic personality disorder at all. What you have is a collection of defense mechanisms that you have learned to use as a response to trauma. I will tell you, I have a lot of clients. They're very self-aware. They're very codependent. They've been codependent for decades. And then I guess it just got too much for them and they sort of snapped. So the false NPD is something that I would say could be contagious. In other words, you can develop those traits. But like I said, it's easily fixable. We would just bring you back to the person you used to be before the trauma. As I told you in the beginning, this is a tool. It's an assessment tool to help me understand beyond the DSM, right? If this person's presenting with very narcissistic traits, they've got at least 5 of the 9 narcissistic traits, they meet criterion 0, you know, maybe they really seem like they have NPD. How do I know if it's true or false? I usually will ask that person, can you remember a time when you weren't like this? And if the person says no, that's a real narcissist, and that's very rare. If the person says yes, then we're probably dealing with somebody who has complex PTSD. They're not really a narcissist. So you can test yourself. And the way that you test yourself is not by asking, was there a time when I could remember not being a narcissist? What you actually want to do is go through each of the 9 criteria. Now, as we all know, in order to get a diagnosis of NPD, true NPD, you need to have 5 out of 9 criteria. So you can go through all 9 of those criteria and ask yourself, do I remember a time when I wasn't grandiose? Was there a time when I wasn't like obsessed or preoccupied with fantasies? So you're going to go through those 9 traits. And if you answer no to 5 or more, then it's true NPD because you were always like this. On the other hand, if you go through the list and you answer yes for 5 or more of those questions, then chances are you're not a real narcissist. But if you have true NPD, that doesn't mean that you can't improve, that you can't work on the disorder, you're not going to be able to change. You're not going to be able to get rid of those traits. You're only going to be able to learn how to manage them. And so hopefully, maybe you've picked up on what I think is the most important criteria or the biggest risk for developing NPD. That's if the NPD happened when you were a very, very young child. So I hope this helps you get an even deeper understanding of what real narcissistic personality disorder is about. I'm Jen Guerriero, and this is Poisonous People. Thanks for watching.